Last year, Ohio State had a Mackey Award finalist at tight end with Cade Stover, who spent the last 2 years of his career being more productive at the tight end position than we've seen at a long time at Ohio State. Now Ohio State's trying to replace that. Obviously, they went and got Will Kacmarek as a transfer from Ohio. We also got a transfer from Ohio a year ago as well. They've got Galani Thurman in this room. You've got G. Scott, Minute Christian coming along as well, along with a couple of freshmen in that room as well. We're trying to figure out what the rotation is going to look like, what that room is going to look like in 2024. And it seems like 9 months in, the kid from OU, the Ohio kid from OU, might be making a push to be Ohio State starting tight end in 2024, Andrew.
That's the way it sounds, right? And when Keenan Bailey first started talking, you went, oh, pretty effusive in his praise for Will Kacmarek. And then he kept going, and then he kept going, and he kept going. And one of the things that we had been told, that we had read about, that we had talked about is Will Kacmarek was brought here because he can block. And that was one of the big issues last year. Not to say that Cade Stover couldn't block, but it was not his strong suit. He was more of a receiving tight end. And I think when you look at G, you probably see some of those same characteristics. So adding in a tight end that could block, that was the impetus. And when you see him sitting there, he's a big dude, really big dude. So we already knew he could block. Today was a lot about route running. And he talked about how much of a route runner he has improved as. He talked about how his pass catching ability has improved. Will talked about how the game has kind of slowed down for him a little bit. He kind of brushed off the whole jump from the MAC to Ohio State thing. He was just like, yeah, I mean, I guess the speed was a little different, but like, you know, the spring was kind of my transition, and he kind of side-eyed the question, and he was like, it wasn't that big of a transition. So that tells me like this guy didn't really get fazed by any of that. He jumped right in, and now all of a sudden you have a tight end who you knew could block, and now he can run, and now he can run routes. Very interesting. Very, very interesting when you talk about this tight end room, because that is kind of what Ohio State, I think, can use in this offense that wants to run the ball. G. Scott talked about the running game being a mindset. You know, he's like, there wasn't a moment that we talked about it, but we want to be able to run the ball. We want to be able to be physical. Look at the teams that win national championships. They run the ball. We want to be able to do that. Well, if you have a guy who can block, and then it sounds like his route tree and his route running ability is now progressing at a level that is very impressive, that's a big deal, and that tells me that he's going to see the field maybe even more than we thought 2 weeks ago, 3 months ago, whenever it was. I think that this could be Ohio State's starting tight end.
Keenan got asked about the comparisons to Cade Stover with Will Kacmarek, and typically when coaches get asked to compare players to other players, they kind of shoot it down, shy away from it, but every so often they almost step into it and go, no, that's right. And Keenan Bailey did that today. That's almost to a T what it was, both in mindset, both of these guys, physical, tough guys who want to get after you physically, who just needed to learn the nuances of the position. And it feels like Cade Stover learned the nuances of the position. He became a Mackey Award finalist and an NFL draft pick. Will Kacmarek, he's such an interesting prospect because he's also from that 2021 recruiting class where they didn't get a full senior year that was normal. And so I almost am wondering if a kid like that, when you're talking about the way Ohio State recruits its backyard sometimes, you got guys like Jack Sawyer who are five-star recruits. You go get that guy anyway. But there's always guys on the back end where you're looking at their junior film, you're looking at their senior film, you go, okay, that guy's developed a little bit more. He might be an Ohio State player. And I'm wondering, had the world not been weird, I don't know, for 12, 24 months there, would Will Kacmarek have been here out of high school instead of having to go to OU first? But he's here, regardless of the point, and it looks like he might be Ohio State's starting tight end in 2024, He is now, that'd be crazy, right? He's the most intriguing guy in the room because of that. I think the other most intriguing guy, and you were there as well, is Galani Thurman. One, because of the way Ryan Day has talked about him, saying we need him to emerge. They need Galani Thurman. And when you look at Galani Thurman, whether he's sitting up or standing down, you know what I'm saying? He just looks the part. He looks like he's supposed to be an elite athlete. And it seems like last year was a developmental year for him, and maybe he has a chance to make a push, even if it's not the beginning of the year, but at some point this year, he becomes a regular part of this offense.
I think the red zone is where Galani Thurman is going to make his money this year because, yes, Galani Thurman, I mean, you notice this, he has this, like, quiet confidence about him. I think you were the one who looked at him and said, like, you're very confident up here. Yeah. You're very comfortable in your own skin up here. And he has this kind of just oozing, not over the top, not cocky, not arrogant, just this very sure of himself kind of way. And I think even with that, it's going to be very hard because G. Scott is still here. And Keenan did say, to be fair, we're talking about Will, we're talking about Galani. Keenan did say G's leading the room right now. G is the one that's kind of pushing everyone along. But you have G, you have Will, and Galani, I think, is like that X factor at tight end for you because you never want to project injuries, but you do have to maybe think, all right, if somebody gets hurt, how do we do this? If something happens, what's our plan B? And I think that Galani is a really solid option for that. We've seen him cook in the end zone here, like when Ohio State's doing red zone drills and things like that. He's a mismatch nightmare. He said he was at 255 pounds. He's 6'7", 255. Find me a defensive player in the country that can match up with him physically and like athletically and is not scared to match up with him. Like, find me a guy because you can. It's a very, very difficult conversation to have when you're a defense like going like, how in the world do we stop this guy? So Galani, I think, especially in 2024, the red zone is where you're going to see him make his money. And then he might be a 2025 conversation at this point because just when you have those two guys at the top of the room, that's pretty hard to surpass.
And Benny Christian, the other guy in that mix as well, as the guy who spent last year obviously not able to play, was ineligible, ruled ineligible for taking some illegal substances that through a sports drink or whatnot. He didn't do anything actually wrong in that situation, but he could not play last year. But because of that, he spent a lot of times on scout team going up against the ones. And Keenan Bailey said that skyrocketed his development, especially as a blocker. Keenan Bailey, some options there, and it's going to be interesting to see how he deploys those tight ends in 2024 when you don't have Cade Stover, but maybe you replace him in the aggregate a little bit more. I'm Stephen Means. That's Andrew Gillis. Get the text 614-350-3315 and continue this conversation at Buckeye Talk wherever you find podcasts. Deuces.